It is no secret that mothers and female caregivers make up the majority of our support group. Our Dravet community is not unique in that way, which makes our next session even more special. A small group of Dravet dads gather to have a heartfelt conversation with David Hirsch. David is the founder of the 21st Century Dads Foundation and creator of the Special Fathers Network, a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. The mission of the 21st Century Dads Foundation is improving the lives of children by raising awareness and resources for greater father involvement, and by empowering and inspiring dads to be present physically, emotionally, financially, and spiritually. David is the host of the Dad to Dad podcast, in which he shares inspirational and enlightening stories of fathers raising children with special needs. This conversation is by dads, for dads. All are welcome to witness their stories, but we especially hope you'll invite your child's father, grandfather, uncle, or any male who is special to your child or adult. This conversation is just the starting point. We at the Dravet Syndrome Foundation are partnering with David to bring a monthly dads meetup, and we'll be sharing the date of our kickoff informational meetup with you very soon.
Hi, my name is David Hirsch, and I'm thrilled to be moderating today's conversation with dads and for dads as part of the Dravet Syndrome Foundation event. So I'll make some brief self-introductions. I'll ask each of our panelists to do the same, and then we'll run through a series of questions. So by brief way of introduction, my name again is David Hirsch. I've been married for 39 years. My wife and I have 5 adult children and 2 grandchildren, and I'm a financial advisor and have been doing the same job for the last 37 years. And outside of family and work, I spend a fair amount of time focused on father involvement. How do we encourage more dads to be involved? And I've helped start 2 not-for-profit organizations. The first, going back to 1997, is the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative. And the second is the 21st Century Dads Foundation, started in 2015, which is the creator of the Special Fathers Network, a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. And I also host the Special Fathers Network Dad-to-Dad podcast. And I've interviewed more than 200 individuals from around the US and a bit around the world, 12 or 13 different countries now. So those are my credentials. Happy to be with you. And I'd like to ask each of our panelists, our dads, to introduce themselves. And Ross, why don't you go first?
Sure. Thank you, David. Hi, I'm Ross Nicholas. I live in Atlanta with my wife, Polly, and 3 children, Millie, Finn, and Henry. Henry is our oldest child, and he's also the one with Dravet syndrome. I'm a business consultant, self-employed, and just trying my best to live the best life I can, kind of chasing these guys around and trying to squeeze in something to relax every now and again. But I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Ross, thanks for being with us. Thanks for the introduction. And Sean, why don't you go next?
Hi, my name is Sean Turpin. I've been married to my wife, Morgan, for 13 years. We live in Oceanside, California, which is in San Diego County. I have 2 kids, a 10-year-old boy named Shane and a 7-year-old named Taylor. Shane is our connection to the Dravet syndrome community. He has Dravet. And like Ross said, when I'm not doing everything with the kids, what I do for work is I'm a stay-at-home parent. I've been the stay-at-home parent for the last 5 years after working as a water quality engineer. When we're not doing something with the kids and all that goes into raising them, we're having fun with the kids, just enjoying the California sunshine.
Sean, thanks for being with us, and thanks for that brief self-introduction. Oceanside, California, I just have to mention this, is the beginning of the Race Across America event every June. I will be there on June 2023, so maybe we'll have a chance to connect there. Okay, sorry for the sidebar. Vince, you're up next.
Thanks for having me. My name is Vince Favel, and I live right outside of Philadelphia. Been married to my wife, Cindy, for just about 20 years now. We have three children, Nicholas, 14, Sophia, 12, and Adriana, 11. And Adriana is how we're connected to Dravet. She started about 3 months having seizures, and it's been a long, bumpy ride along the way. For fun, I'm a huge sports advocate. Being in Philadelphia, I have the advantage of having, four sports, a team in every sport. And I'm also a big kind of memorabilia collector. So I have over 500 bobbleheads just as a touch of what I collect. And I appreciate being invited to the event and looking forward to having a conversation with everyone.
Okay, thank you, Vince. We're going to refer to you as the bobblehead dad.
You won't be the first.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, for those introductions. So I've got a series of questions that I put together, and I'd like to ask each of you the same questions, and we'll stay in the same order. So Ross, you'll go first. So I'm sort of curious to know, briefly describe your child's diagnosis and how it came about.
Sure. So Henry was diagnosed in March of 2008. So he was born in 2007. So it's, not whatever that is, 12, 14, 16 months time frame. So actually 3 months. So he had his first seizure about 3 months. And we had just done the regular stuff. We had gone to get immunizations. And then I guess he had the fever from the shot. And, what's he doing? Where is this? What's going on? And so from that, I guess for the next couple of years, it was just in and out, lots of seizures, always tonic-clonic, multiple hour seizures, in and out of the ER, trying to figure out what the diagnosis was and what was happening. And just based on what was happening, I kind of just went to our neurologist, was like, hey, based on what I'm seeing and how this is happening, it's got to be one of these three things. Two of these things we can test for. The other thing, I don't know. So let's start getting the genetic test. And it turns out that he did have the SCN1A mutation. And since then, he's been just kind of following around and doing the best we can to stay ahead of it. But as you guys know, it's difficult. Each kid is unique, and there's complex needs that come in and out. But doing our best to manage it. And he's in 8th grade. Doing his thing in middle school, loves to ride the school bus, and gets to go to school every day and see his friends. And so we're happy to see it and happy to share that experience with him.
Great, thanks, Ross. And Sean, how did the diagnosis for your child come about?
So Shane's diagnosis, it was from his third neurologist. It was our first appointment with him, and he said, if he has the SCN1A mutation, he has Dravet syndrome, which was different from what the previous neurologist had said. His first seizure started exactly 7 months to the day. He was in my arms. I'm eating dinner, and I thought like food fell into his mouth from me eating, and he was choking or something. I didn't know what to think. I ran to get to what to do when you're a young parent handbook to try and look up is there something about seizures in there? The crazy coincidence with him, with his testing, was my wife actually works for a genetics testing company, and it was her head boss said, hey, let's do some full exome testing on the whole family. And he's like, I think maybe there's a genetic component, and came back de novo SCN1A mutation. And yeah, it's like Ross said, it's the whirlwind at the beginning. But he's now 10 and he's in 5th grade. It's a journey. It's definitely a journey, but we love him to pieces, and we love him.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean. I can tell it's very heartfelt. Okay, Vince, you're up next. How did the diagnosis for your child, Adriana, come about?
So Adriana started, it was the middle of the night. I kind of will never forget the moment. And my wife called me and she said, something just doesn't seem right. And Adriana was kind of moving her legs in like a weird way. and it had to be 3 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, you know what? She just woke up. I think she's just stretching. Let's put her next to us. Let's go to bed and let's see how she is in the morning. And then the next morning, the same thing started again. And then we were like, it's not something that just happened in her sleep. And then we're fortunate enough, being from Philadelphia, we live pretty close to Philadelphia CHOP. Actually, we started at the local doctors first, and the local doctors were like, I don't know. Everyone was confused. So they automatically flew her down to Philadelphia CHOP. And much like everybody else, the first year to 2 years was nothing but in and out of the hospital, and no one really could figure out what exactly was happening. We at one point we were told she had a case that 4 people in the entire world had. And we're like, whoa, what do we do with that information? And then as they started digging in further and further, it was, it's the SCN1A mutation. And then we started with, every medicine that you can think of. Initially, I think she was on 10 medicines at once. And it's been a journey to get to the right mix and the right cocktail that at least is managing her seizures. She's 11 now. I think, like the other gentleman said, it's a bit of a journey. Every day is a challenge. Some are easier than others, but frankly, she's much further along than I think my wife and I ever anticipated, and we're thankful that she's even still here with us to kind of talk about. So that's kind of been our journey up to this point.
Vince, thanks for sharing. So if I've got my numbers right, there's a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, and a 13-year-old. So you all have about the same level of experience as it relates to being a father to a child with Dravet syndrome, and you each have other children as well. So we'll dig into that in a little bit. So I'm sort of curious, Ross, you first. Did you or your wife have any exposure to the world of disabilities or special needs before the diagnosis?
No, no real connection or understanding of what that was all about and what that really entailed. And you kind of get it over time. I mean, initially, at least for me, that those first couple of years are it's just a complete whirlwind. And it's really hard to get your grasp on what's happening and what to do and how to manage it and all those sorts of things. But yeah, no real experience, sort of thrown into the fire.
Thanks, Ross. How about you, Sean? Did you have any exposure to the world of disabilities or special needs before the diagnosis?
No exposure. So it was definitely life-changing and eye-opening to when the seizure started and when we got like the official diagnosis, and definitely difficult, but at the same time, I'll say it's opened us up to a whole new community of people that we, the Dravet syndrome community is amazing, and just it helped us build even tighter bonds with people that we probably would have never met in our life. Like my son's nurse, who's just by far one of like the most amazing people we have like in our network of people that really care about him. So yeah, no exposure to special medical needs.
Sean, thanks for sharing. And Vince, how about yourself? Any exposure to the world of disabilities or special needs beforehand?
My wife's sister actually has spina bifida, so she's in a wheelchair. So since we've been together for so long, I've had some exposure to her before we had any of our children, actually.
Okay, so your sister-in-law has spina bifida. Okay, so for the most part, what I heard, just summarizing the question, responses to the question, were that very little, if any, exposure, right, to the world of special needs. So it's like you get blindsided, with the diagnosis, and whether it's your first child or a subsequent child, right, it puts you down a path that you're not prepared for. And thank God for organizations like the Dravet Syndrome Foundation that you can tap into and meet other parents, maybe who are a little bit farther along the path than you, so that you know that things are going to be challenging, but maybe they're going to be okay too. So thanks for sharing. So back to you, Ross. The question is, what are some of the fears that you had early on, and then perhaps some fears that you still have today?
I mean, SUDEP is a fear. These are very, I guess, extreme and basic fears. I mean, it's life, that he'll survive, and that you can manage that. So I think that was the biggest thing. And you're kind of really trying to figure out what you control and what you can't control, and trying to set things up in the right way, and kind of making sure that everyone is getting the sleep they need or eating the right things, or you're just trying to at least get all the variables in a way that can prevent these things. But yeah, I mean, just keeping him alive. I mean, if you're talking about initially in those first years, I mean, that's really what I was worried about.
And how about more recently? Do you still have some of those same fears, or have they shifted?
More recently, I think it's about care, and are we doing what's right? I mean, I think he's got some behavioral challenges and also some issues with his gait, and so I think that's getting the proper physical therapy involved, and getting all to the right places, and what do we do about behavior, and so those are the more things that we focus on now, is just lining everything up and trying to do things that can give him the best quality of life we can.
Okay, thank you, Ross. I appreciate you being so open and transparent. Sean, how about yourself? What type of fears did you have early on, and what type of fears do you still have today?
Just like Ross said, definitely SUDEP. It was a phrase we had never heard of. We had no idea that, one seizure could be like the final one. And so definitely learning about that. And it really didn't come up until like his second year of life, when again, we saw who was his neurologist for the longest time. Just laid it out straight and didn't sugarcoat things. And that was really hard to hear when our kid was only a little 2-year-old. Something that my wife and I talk about is care for the future. He's only going to get bigger, and we're in our 30s now, but if he lives into his 30s and we're into our 60s, and it's going to get harder and harder for us to care for him. And we call her the little big sister. She asks questions like, what will happen to Shane when you guys go? And that's tricky, because she's just a little 7-year-old. And same thing, like our current fears is, are we making like the correct decisions for medications and treatments? I mean, we've kind of run out of current options. We've done almost every treatment, and now it's like the difficult decisions of trying to enroll them in new clinical trials that we're hopeful for, but just the fear of like, does our timeline, or does his timeline, will it allow for us to get like hopefully to that new next med that might make the difference and help get him the seizure control. But sorry for the emotions. Just kind of that what's on the horizon. There is some hope, but just kind of the fear of the future sometimes.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean, for being so authentic with your response. It's real, and I can feel it just in the tone of your voice, right? The concern you and your wife have for, your son's existence, right? It's got to be the fear of every parent whose child has seizures, right? This might be the last one, and there's got to be some unresolved anxiety, right, that we carry with us as parents. And you know, it's interesting to hear you ask about Taylor, your 7-year-old. You know, thinking that far in the future, right?
Oh,
So she's way ahead of herself
she
compared to the
is
7-year-old.
she asks questions about will Shane ever have kids, and then she knows the answer already. She goes, well, no, because he wouldn't know how to care for them since he needs, you guys to care for him. But then, she has realized that someday, like, he would have to live with her. And yeah, at 7, that's a huge thing to think about. But she's a good one. So
Yeah, well, they're both good ones. They just have different abilities. And
definitely.
you know, I'd love to have a deeper conversation about it all, but what it does bring to mind is the importance of getting advice, not from me, that's for sure, but in the realm of special needs trusts, right? Because that's one of the things that we each need to do as parents is to be thinking or anticipating about the different situations that could occur. And God forbid that you or you and your wife would not be here to care for both your children. You know, what have you done from a planning standpoint? And I think that also gives you some peace of mind as well. Once you've thought through those things, it's not easy, right? You know, anticipating just for anybody, it doesn't have to do with special needs now. You know, who are going to be the guardian of our child or our children, right? And that's not an easy peasy type of conversation to have. Oftentimes it's not like you're not on the same page with your spouse about that. And there's a reluctance to go through that process. But I can tell you from 37 years of being a financial advisor and nudging or pushing people to help make those decisions, right? Don't put off having the will, don't put off doing those special needs trusts. They can be amended, they can be changed. And I think that that adds to some peace of mind too, because you feel like you've made some decisions, right? You're more prepared. And anyway, for another conversation, but thank you again for your authenticity. Vince, how about yourself? Type of fears you had initially, and then, you know, perhaps some fears that you share now.
Unfortunately, I'd say they're probably still the same. So, you know, my first is what's next, right? Every day is kind of a new adventure. And just when we think we have something figured out, and just when we think this is the way to do it, she throws us a curveball. And then somebody else already mentioned it as well, is, are we doing enough? Are we doing the right things? Is the medication right? Is the school right? Is the choices that we made, are they all right? And I guess time will tell, but it's those are the two things that have been kind of almost an everyday thought. What's next? What are we going to see out of her? And are we doing all the right things?
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So I really appreciate you guys talking about these things. I know that most men are not wearing their emotions or their fears on their sleeve, right? It's equivalent to pulling over and asking for directions, right? Whereas a gender that just doesn't do that. And I think what I've learned personally, and then immersing myself in the world of special needs with well over 500 other families, is that moms are much better at this, showing their vulnerability and, reaching out, asking for help. And as guys, we're not so much like that. But the more that we can share our thoughts and our feelings, right, and let people know where we're coming from, you're just being more authentic, more real. And I think that that at some level is actually a strength. It's not a weakness to show your vulnerability and talk about these things. So again, thanks for being so open. So Ross, back to you with the next question. And I'm wondering what some of the biggest challenges that you're encountering as relates to Dravet syndrome and being a dad of, a boy with Dravet syndrome.
For me personally, for the family unit as a whole, where all
yes.
those, I see you nodding. I think one of the challenges is really just ensuring that Henry is a part of the family, and that we're all sort of a functioning and wholesome unit. And not, I'm saying challenge is not as though it's difficult, it's just being mindful of it, right? Because it happens in a lot of different ways. Sean was talking about the interaction between the siblings. I mean, it happens in a lot of different ways, but sort of that's the biggest thing. I mean, we were fortunate enough to travel over the summer, right? And Henry was well enough and we were able to do it. But from a behavioral standpoint, we got to the point where on the flight home and he just wouldn't get on the plane, yelling, screaming, kicking, and kind of just wouldn't do it. And his brother and sister are like, dude, we're trying to go home here, and like, are we gonna make it, and all this is gonna happen, and kind of just trying to maintain positivity and focus in situations like that. I mean, I think those are kind of just an everyday challenge of just trying to, like, okay, I got Henry, but I still need to go pick up something from doesn't matter where, and just kind of how do I just logistically do that sometimes is just a real challenge. So I'm not sure if you wanted something deeper than that, David, or if that's enough to tee these other gentlemen up.
Under the banner of challenges, I'm wondering, Vince, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've encountered?
Much like Ross, it's a behavior thing. I've said it a few times, but we kind of never know what we're going to get out of Adriana. Sometimes she happily gets dressed and runs downstairs and can't wait to get onto the school bus, and all she wants to do is go to school and see her friends. And then Tuesday comes and she doesn't want to get dressed. She doesn't want to go to school. She doesn't want to see her friends. And it's almost like Groundhog Day. Every day is kind of a little different, the same, but different. That, and then the other challenge I would say is trying to stay together as a family unit. And what I mean by that is, we have 2 other children, and we want those other children to have experiences in life. And sometimes it's just too difficult for the 5 of us to go out because we don't know how Adriana is going to react. And frankly, it's not fair to the other 2 children, right? So my wife and I have this constant battle of, do the 5 of us go or do the 3 of us go? So we find ourselves a lot of times that 3 of us will go do something, and Adriana and whoever, would draw straws that day, and we'll stay home with her. So the other kids, later in life don't feel like they missed out on things, or just so they're not missing out on things, and just so we can have bonding time with them. So, that those are definitely the 2 challenges.
Well, you didn't use the word divide and conquer, but that's sort of the strategy that I heard you describing, Vince.
Yep.
And the bigger issue, which is really a universal issue for anybody that has more than one child, is siblings and family balance, right? You have to recognize that you're a parent to your whole family, not just the child with special needs. And there's going to be a disproportionate amount of your time that is probably spent, and the resources that go along with that, for that matter, on the child with special needs. And you just have to be crystal clear about, how are we going to rebalance? How are we going to make sure that we're equitable, not equal, but how do we make sure that all of our children are, is treated as important as another one? So thank you for being so open and transparent about that. That's an ongoing challenge, and unfortunately, there's no simple solutions or silver bullets. So thanks again. How about you, Sean? What are the biggest challenges that you face?
I'm going to echo what Ross and Vince said about major behavioral issues. Even we've been doing in-home ABA therapy for several years now. And like Vince said, it will be, wow, it's really making progress. Like, us as like a family unit is making progress with the ABA, like his behaviors are better. We know how to like interact with him better. And then the next day it's like none of those techniques work. He's like totally different person, it's like, night and day. And that can wear on you, because you think like, oh, we've finally made big strides, and like his ABA supervisors like, oh, we're seeing so much progress on his like his reports and stuff. And he does so great when the therapists are there 5 days a week after school, and I'm working with them. And then when they're not there, it's like he's a totally different person. It's like, how is that possible? But and just daily life, every transition, every aspect of toileting, eating meals, just making sure he's drinking enough fluids. Every little thing is just takes more time. It's and for our daughter, it's exactly that. It's like our focus can be so much on Shane's care that, you know, sometimes we can snap at her because we're like, we expect you to, you know, why aren't you already ready for school? Like, how did you not do this? And we have to forget that she's still just like a 7-year-old kid. But one thing that I would say too, one of the biggest challenges is just finding a medication or a treatment that can control the seizures. That doesn't also come with just vicious side effects that you know cause severe weight loss or severe behavior or, you know, hair loss or whatever it might be. We've, you know, tried pretty much everything in 10 years and just never found something that was like the golden ticket that didn't give us more than just like a couple months of a honeymoon of seizure reduction. So I think that's probably the thing that wears on us most as a challenge, is just trying to find a treatment that can get us the seizure control without also causing really severe side effects.
Well, thanks for sharing, Sean. It's very common, whether it's Dravet syndrome or another diagnosis that includes seizures. Doctors can certainly prescribe strong medications and just about eliminate the seizures. But to your point, you know, what's going to be left, right? The quality of life could be changed dramatically. So, you know, the goal isn't necessarily to eliminate all seizures, but to minimize the impact of them so that you can be as whole a person as you can be. And that's a moving target, right? Because the physiology is changing as our children get older. So my heart reaches out to you and the other dads, other families for that matter, you know, who are struggling with the seizure control issue. And, you know, sometimes one of the challenges is that mom and dad are not on the same page, right? We don't agree with our spouses, right? She wants to go left and you want to go right, or, you know, it's let's do things as a family versus, you know, divide and conquer, right? And there's not a right or wrong solution. So I think that part of the challenge is, you know, finding that middle ground, right? Where, you know, you can be, you know, on a reasonable playing field with one another. So thanks again for sharing. So I'm thinking about important decisions now, and I'm wondering what were some of the more important decisions that you've made as parents raising a child with Dravet syndrome? And we're going to start with Vince this time.
That's a tough one, right? There's so many decisions. I would say perseverance and being the advocate for Adriana. You know, you go to a lot of these places and a lot of doctors and nurses, and some people kind of write you off as just another case or what have you. And I think it's important that we stand there and we you know, fight for her, and kind of do whatever it is that we need for her. You know, I'll give you an example of you know, around the country, CBD is viewed differently in different places. For us in Pennsylvania, CBD was, you know, 3 horrible letters that you should never ever say. We went through a point where we were getting CBD shipped to us from Colorado. It was Charlotte's Web, and it was supposed to be, you know, what was supposed to help with seizures, and so we tried it. Right, you do whatever you need to do for your child, and I remember there was a batch of bad seizures for Adriana, and we go to the hospital and they ask you what medication she's on, and you say CBD, and I had a nurse give me a really hard time about it. She's like, well, where are you getting it? How are you getting it? And I, you know, I kind of snapped my head around and I was like, if you had a child like I had, you would do whatever it is that you had to do to take care of that child. I suggest you walk away. And one of the other nurses grabbed her and goes, you should probably go to a different room too. And it's just, I think those are the important decisions, right? You do what you think is best for your child. Whether there is or not, we don't know, but the important decisions is keep fighting and be her advocate.
Yeah, well, thanks for emphasizing both those points, Vince, about the importance of perseverance as well as advocating, right? You're your child's best advocate, second to none. And, the perseverance, what came to mind is that you're running a marathon, right? You need to pace yourself, right? Because it's a long journey. And, you don't want to give up, right? Like you said, you'll do anything you have to do. So, Sean, I'm wondering, what are some of the more important decisions that you've made when you look back over Shane's, first 10 years?
We made what wasn't necessarily the most difficult decision, but we got the opportunity to buy a house in Oceanside. We were up in Orange County, closer to like Disneyland, Anaheim area. And our jobs were, mine was in LA and my wife's was in Orange County, and we made the decision, let's buy a house close to my in-laws just for more family support, because you want to build your support network. But it was a difficult decision because then I suddenly had a 4-hour commute daily. And it turned into me just feeling kind of absent from a lot of stuff, and going into like fears and challenges with that decision was Shane's seizures. He went through a really nice honeymoon period, and I think a lot of Dravet kids do this. They it's like a storm at the beginning, and then it kind of gets better for a while. And during that time, you kind of let your guard down, and it's like, okay, we can make this work. I can do this commute and stuff. And then the phone calls would start coming of, he had a seizure, and I'd be like, I'm 90 miles from home. Like this is not ideal. Like, what did I get myself into? As a family, the decision where I ended my career to become the stay-at-home parent, it was difficult, but it was the right decision. It was half of Shane's life, and that meant that my wife had pretty much put her career on hold for 5 years. / was working part-time from home while also helping do all the things for both kids, which I don't know how she balanced all of those things. I mean, she's a superhero, super mom. I don't know how she did it. But that was definitely kind of a difficult decision to stop my career, because I thought, okay, I can keep doing this. And even though it's got a crazy commute and stuff, like, it was really good benefits and pay and all those sorts of things. And we thought, like, this is what we needed. But I think it was probably the best decision we've made so far. And one other difficult decision was just enrolling him into now his second clinical trial. And it's not necessarily the one we absolutely want to enroll him into, but it's kind of like, we have to be his advocate. We have to try whatever might be on the horizon, and what might be available. And it comes with a lot of obstacles, because it means traveling by plane and possibly him being on like a placebo for half a year and not even on the medication. And it's difficult, because you can't say, hey, Shane, what do you think about this? He's verbal, he can communicate, but he can't say, like, yes, I agree, like, let's try this. And it's kind of hard to have to always make the decisions. And going back to something you had said, David, about like the parents having to make the decisions, and maybe they both don't always see eye to eye. I admit that when he was younger, I kind of, especially when I was doing that commute and I wasn't as present, I kind of was just like, do whatever you think is the best. And then sometimes it wouldn't work out. And I admit that I'd be like, well, I had my doubts and I should have been more vocal. I just was way too passive, and way too just kind of putting that responsibility into my wife's hands. And and making her have to make the difficult decisions. I should have been more involved in the decision making, because that's putting a lot of burden on her to have to be the one to make those big decisions alone. But yeah.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, Sean. That would really knock the legs out for most anybody if you had to make decisions that would end your career, right? Because most men, I'm speaking, very broadly, are so tightly wound or identify with what we do from a career standpoint. So thank you for your authenticity there. And, the world of clinical trials, brings some hope and some other consternation, like you were saying, right? The reason they call them clinical trials is that, some individuals are going to get the medication or the treatment and the others are going to be in the placebo group. And you're like, holy cow, does it really work that way? So thank you again for sharing. And you have to have some faith or hope that things are going to work out or be okay, like I think you were saying. So, okay, I'm almost out of breath just listening to you guys. Ross, you're next. Important decisions.
Important decisions. I think, well, one of the ones is really just to choose life, to sort of, to deal with it, put your big boy pants on and roll up your sleeves and get in and figure it out. And I think there is a decision every day about, man, I don't know if I got the strength to do this today, but you got to kind of do it and get going. And with that, some of the real blessings are, we chose to have more kids because Henry was our first. And so, with all that entails, we realized early that we needed to plug into special services and all the benefits that the state and the institutions and organizations can offer, and just understand and get a network and connect with DSF and all those sorts of things. So we kind of made a choice to sort of accept the diagnosis and try to see if we could navigate it. And with that, I think kind of this idea that you need help, and choosing to let other people into your world, whether that be nurses or caregivers or other family members or friends that we choose to be family, and all those sorts of things, that and kind of expanding that horizon. It really does take a village. It takes like 6 villages to raise a Dravet kid, and so like you gotta kind of open your arms and let other people do it. And they're not going to do everything the way you want, and, all those sorts of things, but you just need help. And just sort of making that choice just to be vulnerable. Like, hey, I don't know how I'm going to do this. Can you help me? So.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, Ross. Like we talked about, vulnerability isn't something that most men gravitate toward. And, I think that it's like a step forward, a step backward sometimes, right? You realize that if you can be focused on that it can be a strength and something that you can leverage to your advantage, to your family's advantage. So I'm thinking about self-care now, and I'm wondering what each of you does to make sure that you're bringing your A game in the area of self-care. And we'll start with Sean.
For us, if we can get a date night, if we can utilize some respite hours with Shane's nurse, or if for some reason there's a day off in school and she ends up coming on a weekend, we jump on that opportunity to get out, just the two of us, get the help from the grandparents with our daughter, and just get out and try and like alleviate some of that stress, have a nice dinner, have a drink. Just we always end up just talking about the kids anyways, but it's just a little breather moment. With COVID and stuff, it actually, one positive of COVID is I've reconnected with some of my friends that I barely ever see because everyone kind of moved to different states and stuff. So doing Zoom hangouts with some of my friends, just catching up. I'm a big fantasy sports guy. I'm a huge Dodgers fan. I love baseball, and I do fantasy baseball and fantasy football, and there's some control and some sort of elements to that are kind of fun for me. So I don't know if it's self-care because it can be stressful, but it's a different kind of stress. I love getting to take the dogs on walks. And my wife was like, that's not self-care, but yard work I find to be self-care for me, just because if I can have some time where I'm out there doing yard stuff, just with some music on or something, it's just kind of therapeutic. But at the DSF conference, I heard some of the other dads, and there was some dads that were who now have like grown adult children with Dravet, and just hearing some of those dads say, like, you know, they discovered yoga much later in life and they wish they had been doing it for 40 years or something, and it kind of inspired me, like I should consider that. And just you know, deep breathing and things like that I think would be a positive. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, thanks for sharing. And it sounds like you've got a number of things that you can turn to or look back on that, you know, help put things in perspective and help you spend some time on things that, you know, are important to you, right? As opposed to just important to your family. And I think that's part of self-care. And you touched on the importance of respite, which is super important, you know, with being able to recharge your battery and being very intentional about that time, right? Not waiting until the end of the day and seeing if there's any time, but, you know, putting something on the schedule, making arrangements that you can go out to dinner, or maybe do an overnight or a weekend someplace, right? And rekindle that fire. So thank you again for sharing. Vince, how about yourself? What comes to mind when you're thinking about self-care?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? I mean, as a you know, I help run an organization, I help run a company, so I do a lot of hours at work. And then when I get home, I'm pretty exhausted. And then, you know, doing what I can to help with homework and such with the kids. Self-care is definitely a challenge. You know, we do try to do date night as much as we can. The challenge there is trying to find babysitters that we feel comfortable with, knowing that if something were to happen with Adriana, that they know what to do next. You know, my wife will go through a 30-minute spiel and I'll walk in, I'll go, now that you got her spiel, if something doesn't seem right, just call 911. And the babysitter will just laugh. And I mean, that's kind of the reality of the situation. You know, so self-care, it's hard to find that time. You know, I mentioned I'm a collector, so some of my free time, I mean, that's what I do. You know, I collect, I organize my collection. You know, I go into my man cave, those rare moments that I have, and I kind of enjoy what I can when I can. But it's definitely a challenge and something that I definitely need to work on.
Yeah, well, thanks for mentioning what you have, and it is a work in progress, right? It's not like, oh, I do this and you know everything's in balance. It's a lot of give and take, especially if you have responsibility for a company or other people's lives, right? That's what I think about as a business owner. You know, a lot of other people are depending on you, right? So there's different types of pressure that go along with that. So Ross, what comes to mind when you think about self-care?
I mean, you guys hit it on the date night. I mean, you know, I've been married for 18 years. She's my best friend, and if I can get a chance to spend some time with her, then you know that's certainly a wonderful thing, and I'm happy and blessed to have her in my life. I think, you know, I call it get the crazies out. So I like to, you know, run and work out and do that sort of thing. There's something about just moving your body and kind of letting the stress, you know, dissipate is important to do. And then I think, you know, Sean talked about yard work. I mean, sometimes you just want to do stuff you can control. And like, hey, man, the grass was, you know, this high and now it's this high and it's good. And
Yeah.
it's lower. And like, there was a leaf there and now there's not a leaf. And, you know, like just, you know, I did that. It's clean now, you know? And so I think for me, it's silly, but like, you know, there's just stuff that just mounts up on your checklist of things you want to do, you know, pictures that fall down or lights or just stuff. And like, oh man, I feel good because I have brought order back to this chaos that is life. So I think that's in a weird way, it is kind of caring because you gives yourself a sense of accomplishment success for these.
It's funny you say that, Ross, because I have a little to-do list and I'm like, I have to do this. And my wife's always like, why do you have to do it today? I'm like, because it's the weekend and when else am I going to do it? And to your point, it's like, hey, look, I hung that light. I accomplished something, right? It's
Right.
as silly
Yeah.
as you say, as you make it sound. I have that same
Right.
I changed a light bulb. Look at me.
I got a kid. I can't solve that, but man, I
can change light bulbs with the best of them.
When I was doing my crazy commute and working and stuff, I was notoriously bad about being like, I have to get all these things done on the weekend, and it'd be like, well, there needs to be family time. But it was just kind of a sense of control. Like, I can get these checked off the list. Now, that being said, now that I'm a stay-at-home parent, I feel accomplished when it's like, okay, I got all the laundry done and folded and all these things, and I kept the house clean because we have ABA technicians coming in to do therapy and stuff and all these things. But it's secretly, it's like, well, I don't want to have to make that phone call to insurance today. So I'll do this stuff that, that laundry didn't need to be done, but I'll feel accomplished that I did it. It's kind of a different thing. It's being a stay-at-home parent. All of those things that everyone else normally just has to do, just day-to-day stuff. I mean, it's therapeutic to some extent, but it also allows me to procrastinate because, the boss isn't breathing down my neck that why don't you have this report done, and you were messing around doing something else just because it was easier. It's, in my mind, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, I can check these things off the list even though they weren't on the list, but the things that are like the difficult things, I can keep putting them off. But I mean, no one wants to be on hold with insurance for like 2 hours or something. So it's more fun doing the dishes or something instead. But yeah.
Chop wood, carry water. That's the
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for all rhyming in there. And I think being a to-do list person, a very serious to-do list person, like Post-it notes everywhere of all these things I'm trying to get done or do. And there is a sense of accomplishment, right? When you can check things off your to-do list. But I didn't hear one of you mention a honey-do list, where my wife is like, hey, don't forget about your honey-do list, right? These are the things that she wants done that I need to do. So that's just another challenge. Okay, we're in the home stretch. Last question. I'm sort of curious to know, what meaningful advice did you get early on, or advice that you can offer other dads who are close to their beginning of their journey with a child with Dravet syndrome? And we'll start with Ross.
So Henry had a code blue when he was young, and the attending physician was great, and obviously things worked out, and he was like, you never run to an emergency. I always walk, because when I get there, like, so much is expected of me that I have to be sort of mindful of what's happening. And so, like, it translated to me sort of in this sort of, you have to embrace the moments, and there's good and there's bad. I mean, and you guys know, like, oh, this is how the day's going to go today. Okay. All right. So this and this, like, okay, this is what we got to do. And this is the situation. I can't believe, they're doing this right now. Like, really? And so you kind of have to do and manage that. But then there's also the really positive things when you're like, oh man, everything worked out today and everything is wonderful. And we did get to go on vacation or have dinner or have a meal without incident or whatever it is. And so, embracing those moments and kind of just, doing your best to be present and to be with the people that you love and kind of do what's needed, I think is.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ross, for mentioning the importance of being present. I think that when I think about all the work that I've done in the name of father involvement, there are 4 attributes that come to mind with being present. And it has to do with commitment, love, patience, and being honest. And being present doesn't just mean to be physically present, but it means to be present emotionally, spiritually, and obviously financially present. So thank you again for sharing. Sean, Any good advice that you got early on or that you'd like to offer another dad?
So when Shane was right around 1 year old, we had this was before the Dravet syndrome diagnosis. We had a total debacle. He was on a sodium channel blocker medication. We were in the hospital for like 5 days. They discharged us. He ended up back in the hospital like a day later, and we were in there for several more days. And during that second discharge, it's like a social worker from the hospital or someone who talked about benefits said like they started explaining like about Medicaid or Medi-Cal, and we were both kind of like, we were tired, we were out of it, but we're just like, well, we make too much money, like he wouldn't qualify. We didn't. I wish at that moment we had paid more attention, because I would say to young parents and young dads starting with kids with Dravet syndrome, two things: expand your network and build your resources. And talking about build your resources, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars in medical bills we paid before we finally got him on like state Medi-Cal as a secondary insurance, but he probably would have qualified as soon as he had like the diagnosis. And that was big. And building the resources of, we probably could have done nursing sooner. We probably could have had in-home oxygen sooner, which maybe then we wouldn't have been making so many 911 phone calls and ER trips and ambulance rides and stuff. And you'll have your physicians push back. You'll have your neurologists be like, oh, you don't need that. But just advocating and being like, no, like, Dravet syndrome is for life, so you should get the help early, because the syndrome progresses, it changes, it keeps you on your toes. So if you can be as proactive as possible and try and have as many resources in your corner, hopefully you can help your kid sooner and not have to be so reactive. And then expanding the network. I'll admit that my first Dravet syndrome conference, like big conference, was just this one in June. And I wish we had gone to more of them sooner. I mean, COVID canceled one of them, but it was difficult to hear some of the talks. But it was also inspiring to hear some of the talks and to meet some of the experts in the field and to meet with other parents, especially meet with other dads. And just, I'm grateful of the DSF. And I came away from the conference wanting to be more involved because of the conference, and just feeling like even more bonded to Shane, and to thinking like, there is hope, and the DSF can really help you get that inspiration. And just also expanding your network, educate the grandparents, the teachers, the aides, family, friends, whoever it might be, build that network. I think my mom still has issues, even though Shane is 10, she still doesn't really quite understand Dravet syndrome. And we've given her like handouts from the DSF, and I still don't think she totally grasps like the severity of the syndrome. And I think part of it is it's denial, because she doesn't want her, grandson to be going through what he's going through. But just if you expand your network when they're young, and use the DSF handouts and educate everyone you can around you, it brings awareness, and it also just it hopefully builds your village where you can feel comfortable at some point to be able to like leave them with someone that's not like your significant other.
Yeah, well, really good advice there, Sean. And the takeaway that I had was be intentional and err on the side of leaning in earlier, right? And get plugged into the networks that exist, especially DSF. It's just a start, right? That's not the only resource. And thank you again for sharing Okay, Vince, you'll have the last word on advice.
So it's interesting. My father used to say to me a lot as growing up as a kid, he used to say, do something even if it's wrong. And, and I laugh about it. I'm like, I kind of get it now. Just keep on keeping on, right? Like day by day, just keep doing what you do. And the only other, thing that I can say, and David, you've mentioned about, the father and the males and, how we have to be the big, strong, pillar of the family or what have you. And one of my advices is, take a moment, right? Like, don't feel bad about that. Like, I think I hold it together pretty well, but there's times I need to take a moment. I need to walk in the garage. I need to walk in the basement. I need to take an extra long shower. There's times I just need to take a moment and go, okay, I got through today. Tomorrow's another day. And it just, don't be afraid to take that moment and have that, I don't want to say a meltdown, but, have a meltdown if you need to at times. We have other people around us. I have other children who will be there for me, and my wife and, my extended friends, and, just don't be afraid to take a moment. We don't have to be the barbarians of the past, right? We're human beings and we're dealing with a lot of stuff. And then it's okay to express that sometimes.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing, Vince. You didn't use the word masculinity, but I think that's what comes to mind, is that there's that old model of masculinity, the stoic, tough, buttoned up person and not showing any emotions. And, no doubt that's probably important if you're an air traffic controller, maybe a financial advisor. You don't want somebody who's super emotional, who's an air traffic controller. But, for the rest of us, which is like 99.9% of the planet, I think that there's a benefit to being in contact and touch with your own emotions and being aware of other people's emotions. So thanks again for that good advice as well. So that brings us to a close with our short time today. I just want to say heartfelt thanks to each of the three of you for participating, taking time out of your busy schedules to help with the DSF program today. And we are going to put together a dad's meetup group for our listening audience. If you like the conversation that you've heard, you'd like to be involved with a group of us, keep an eye open for an invitation to a dad's meetup group for the DSF dads. And if you'd like some additional information on the 21st Century Dads Foundation, the Special Fathers Network, the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, you can go to the 21stcenturydads.org website. That's 21stcenturydads.org. And I'm just going to throw in another thought that came to mind as we were going through our discussion today. And one of the common aspects of Dravet syndrome has to do with seizures or epilepsy. And there's an organization here in Chicago known as CURE, which stands for Citizens United for Research in Epilepsy. And I think of it as the epicenter for all things epilepsy or seizure related. So if you're not already tapped into that resource, that's one that I can highly recommend. So that'll be it for today. Thank you again for our panelists. Thank you again to Aaron at DSF for organizing today's program. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be the best dad that you can be.